In 1996, the world saw the launch of one of the most important games ever made, Super Mario 64. Not only did this game bring the Mario franchise into the third dimension, inspire hundreds of other 3D platformers, and introduce staple mechanics to the Mario series, at its core, it was just a fun game. Mario 64 did an amazing job at showing off the capabilities of the N64, and overall served as an incredible first impression as a launch title for the system. And in 2004, over 8 years after Super Mario 64's release, Nintendo would announce their new handheld console at their E3 press conference, the Nintendo DS. And to show off just how powerful this new dual-screen system was, Nintendo revealed an enhanced remake of Super Mario 64 for the system, very appropriately called Super Mario 64 DS. This game is one I played a lot throughout my childhood. I poured hours into just about every aspect of the game, but it's been years since I've properly gone back and played through it, and in recent times, I've seen a sudden increase in negative talk surrounding it. So what better time than now to return to an almost 18-year-old DS game and see if my nostalgia is really blinding me. My name is Mariomikester, and welcome to a Super Mario 64 DS retrospective. In this video, I'm going to try and answer one simple question. Is Super Mario 64 DS a bad remake? Released on November 21st, 2004 here in North America, Super Mario 64 DS was Nintendo's big launch title for the DS. And very interestingly, wasn't even initially called Super Mario 64 DS. As I mentioned before, at Nintendo's E3 2004 press conference, they showed off what very well seemed to be Super Mario 64 running on an actual DS, featuring 3 new playable characters, Luigi, Wario, and Yoshi, as evident from the icons on the touchscreen. But what I didn't mention was the playable prototype version of the game available on the E3 2004 show floor. From the very limited amount of footage there is available online showcasing this demo and the very few accounts from the people who were able to play it, we can gather that Super Mario 64 DS was originally called Super Mario 64 x 4, and that it seemed to be an almost exclusively multiplayer game, where the goal was to run around a select amount of recreated levels and compete with others to collect a certain amount of stars in a time limit. Pretty much identical to the versus mode we see in the final version of the game, but a little more fleshed out and complete, almost as if it was supposed to be the entire game. There was a single player mode available though too, albeit very limited. In this single player mode, you got 60 seconds to run around either Bob-omb Battlefield or the outside of Peach's castle, and just kinda mess around. Seeing the game in this state is very interesting, and really makes you wonder if it was even supposed to be a remake in the first place.
Me, Mario.
Upon opening the game, you're greeted with a title screen pretty similar to that of the original Mario 64's, but now DS-ified. You got the settings option, versus mode, adventure, rec room, and of course Mario's big fat head in the center of the screen. Clicking this head results in Mario turning into a drawing that you can either play around with, or what I prefer doing, using the touchscreen to draw your own beautiful rendition of Mario. Fun fact about this little drawing feature, if you repeatedly click then go back to the menu, instead of getting a Mario drawing or Yoshi, you'll instead get a little drawing of Luigi. This is such a minor little Easter egg, but I absolutely love it. Getting to the adventure mode though, Super Mario 64 DS opens with a very different cutscene than that of the original. Of course, Peach has still baked a cake for Mario and invited him over to eat it, but now joining him out of the pipe are 2 of the new playable characters, Luigi and Wario. After a bit of fighting, the gang make their way up to the castle, but never seem to leave. Because of this, Lakitu alerts a sleeping Yoshi to wake up and go find the 3. Having the player start off with Yoshi, and hell, having Yoshi be a playable character in the first place, is something I've always loved about this game. Yoshi works so well in 3D here. I mean, you got his flutter jump that serves as a great way to cross gaps or hold your place in the air for a while, and his tongue attack that allows him to eat and spit out enemies, or turn them into eggs that, when you shoot them, home in on the nearest enemy. Yoshi's moveset and special abilities are so fun to mess around with in levels, and really makes me hope we get to someday see him fully playable again in a 3D Mario game. The closest we've gotten in recent years is him being capturable in Odyssey. Since you start off as Yoshi, a character who's unable to pick up and throw things like Mario, the first star of the game, the fight with King Bob-omb, is much different. The fight now sees King Bob-omb throwing bob-ombs at Yoshi that Yoshi has to eat up and spit back at the king before they explode in his mouth. The game having this many differences so early into its runtime is absolutely enough to make you realize that Super Mario 64 DS isn't exactly a faithful remake of the N64 game with some new characters. It's an entire reimagining of the game with huge changes to stages, missions, and boss fights that to me really help it stand on its own as an entirely different experience. Speaking of huge changes that help this game stand on its own, just look at the renovation this room got in 64 DS. Now instead of just being a tiny room with the same painting plastered on the walls 3 times, it's a gigantic room that holds 4 locked doors. 3 of the locked doors here are for the 3 unlockable characters in the game. But that white door? I mean, there could be anything in there. In order to unlock the 3 character doors so you're not stuck as this dinosaur the entire time, you have to find each of their portraits hidden around different areas of the castle, or in Luigi's case, stuck in King Boo's attic. Inside of these portraits lie entirely new levels, even with a couple power stars to collect in them. And while these new levels are fun to mess around in for a bit, the highlight of these portrait stages have to be the boss fights. The fights here are completely unique to 64 DS and are a lot of fun. The boss in Mario's portrait is against the one and only Goom Boss from Paper Mario 64, who, fun fact, is the only Paper Mario character to appear in a mainline Mario game. The boss in Luigi's portrait is against King Boo from the Luigi's Mansion series, who, in order to defeat, has the player use the reflection of a mirror to tell where he is on screen. Finally, the boss in Wario's portrait has you go up against Chief Chili, a completely original boss enemy. Having the player unlock these characters in a unique way like this, instead of just having them be unlocked by having a certain amount of stars, is something I've always appreciated about 64 DS. It's just another way the game shows its creativity. And I mean, 64 DS doesn't just show creativity with the way you unlock these characters, it also shows creativity with how these characters control. I've already touched on how Yoshi controls, so let's move on to Mario. Mario has the exact same moveset he had in the original game, except now his wall jump has a slide to it, whereas in the original you had to time your wall jumps when Mario would collide with the wall. What makes Mario so special here is that he is the only character in the game capable of wall jumping, making him vital in certain situations. Moving on to Luigi, he has a very similar moveset to that of Mario's, but can jump much higher, is able to run on water for a short amount of time, and most importantly, can do this. This twirl Luigi does after a backflip is extremely overpowered. There were so many scenarios in the original game that were so tedious, like slowly waiting for the penguin across the ice bridge in Snowman's Land, or in Tall Tall Mountain, finding the pink bomb to open up a cannon, then carefully shimmying your way across this ledge towards the cannon, and finally lining up your shot perfectly so you land on the star. That Luigi can just effortlessly complete with a single twirl. Seriously, Luigi's twirl is so broken that the star Mario's Super Wall Kick in Cool Cool Mountain, a star that is clearly meant to be collected by Mario using his wall jumping abilities, can effortlessly be collected by Luigi by performing a simple twirl. It's insane. Moving on to the last and definitely least of the 4 playable characters, we have Wario. Wario has literally the exact same moveset as Mario, except he's much slower, can't jump very high, and obviously can't wall jump. Wario tries to make up for this with his strength, being the only character in the game able to destroy these black bricks, but that just makes him incredibly situational and incredibly unviable. Apart from Wario, I can absolutely understand maining any of the other characters as they all definitely do have their strengths, but for me, Luigi will always be my boy. The custom movement abilities weren't the only thing that made these characters distinct though. Each one also has a completely unique Power Flower ability that helps you collect certain stars or find secrets hidden about. These Power Flower abilities not only repurpose the power of the caps from Super Mario 64, like with Luigi's Vanish ability and Wario's Metal Power, they also introduced entirely new abilities to the game like Balloon Mario and Fire Breathing Yoshi. Along with this, instead of having to unlock each power individually like in the N64 version, you get them all at once after hitting the big red switch in Mario Wings to the Sky, which makes repeat playthroughs of the game a lot less tedious. To use these Power Flower abilities and levels, you have to break open these red question mark boxes spread throughout every stage, similar to the red, green, and blue ones you'd find in the N64 version. Mario is the only character in the game to have two abilities, one being the wing cap power he gets from specific levels from the feather, and the other being the balloon power he gets from the Power Flower. Personally, I think the power-ups are done much better in 64DS than the original, as in this game, the boxes are more prevalent in levels, and because of each character having a different power they get from the boxes, they aren't just situational anymore. For example, to some, Luigi being able to use his Vanish ability in Bob on Battlefield would seem absolutely useless, but to someone younger or less experienced who's struggling on the Chain Chomp Star because of, I don't know, the controls, Luigi being invincible here so the Chain Chomp can't damage them would help them complete the star much more easily. This small change is one of many little changes that make this game feel like a more complete and accessible package. A change that doesn't make this game feel like a more complete and accessible package, though, is the controls. If you've ever played Super Mario 64 DS before, you knew this was coming. But when looking back at this game, especially when discussing if it's a good remake or not, the controls of it cannot be ignored. Super Mario 64 on the N64 was designed around full 360-degree movement, meaning that the player could move around in a bunch of different directions, and that objects and platforms could also be placed in a bunch of different directions as well, and that gameplay wouldn't be affected if a certain platform was placed in a certain way. Now this spells problems for the DS remake because of one thing. Well, the lack of one thing. Analog controls. The Nintendo DS, despite being marketed as a console capable of full 3D graphics, lacks the analog control stick that made controlling most 3D games, especially 3D platformers, much easier, and instead only had a directional pad, capable at most of going in 8 directions, meaning that in a 3D space, instead of having 360 degrees of movement, you only had 8. This loss of hundreds of degrees of movement makes controlling your character very difficult at times. There were multiple occasions where I'd want to go in a very specific direction, but since I could only move 8 ways, I would completely miss where I wanted to go and would have to sit there realigning myself. The game tries to work around this by allowing full 360-degree movement if you control the game with your finger or stylus on the touchscreen, but playing like this is incredibly awkward and does not feel right at all. The only time it feels even mildly natural is when you're swinging Bowser, where I actually prefer using the touchscreen. If you play this on a 3DS or Wii U through the Virtual Console, you'll be able to play the game with either the 3DS's circle pad or the Wii U's analog control stick. And at first, I thought this would make controlling the game much more bearable. But oh boy was I wrong. You see, since the game was never built with analog controls in mind, when you play this on a control stick, the game simply just maps the functionality of the D-pad to the control stick or circle pad, meaning you still only have 8 directions of movement. The reason Super Mario 64 was so fun in the first place was because of how seamless and fun it was to control. I used to spend hours playing the N64 version just messing around with the movement, and over subsequent playthroughs, I started to create cool movement tech that allowed me to collect a star in a faster, impressive way. So the DS remake having such a big problem with its controls really holds the game back. But I mean, it's not like they didn't try to make the controls manageable. There are different control options you can switch to in the settings that may work for some, but to me, they always just felt awkward and unnatural. The controls are without a doubt the biggest reason why many discount this game and see it as a downgrade of the original. But really, Super Mario 64 DS has so much more content to offer than that of the original. I mean, even outside of the increase from 120 stars to 150 stars in the adventure mode, the inclusion of multiple new stages, and each main level now having 8 stars instead of 7, Super Mario 64 DS also has 2 huge side modes that add hours to the experience, with my personal favorite of the 2 being the minigames. Mario 64 DS's minigames were, well, minigames that you can unlock by catching character-specific bunnies hidden all around the castle. These bunnies would appear after you collected a certain amount of stars, and depending on the character who caught them, would unlock minigames for that specific character. For example, Yoshi has minigames like the Loves Me Not game, Wanted, and this Wiggler game that my 7-year-old brain could never understand. Mario has minigames like this Koopa Shell bowling game, Sword Explode, and this one where you had to make him jump on a Shy Guy. Wario's got stuff like Snowball Roll, this one where you shoot bob-ombs out of the sky, and one where you try to land a Spiny Shell on a Lactose Koopa Shell. Out of all the minigame categories here though, Luigi's had to be the best one. Luigi's minigames were all about gambling. Each one focused on you betting coins on something. My personal favorite of all the games here was Luigi Jack, which is literally just blackjack. The fun thing about Luigi's minigames is that instead of going for a high score like you do in the others, here your goal is to rack up as many coins as you possibly can, with the coin count you've achieved being saved even after you exit a game. My goal when I was younger was always to max out the coin counter in Luigi Jack, which I think I actually did at some point. The minigames of Super Mario 64 DS, especially Luigi's, add hours of fun to the experience and really make 64 DS feel like a complete package. I've said this before in regards to New Super Mario Bros. DS bringing back these minigames, but there's so much to do here that I'm honestly surprised Nintendo never sold a minigame collection separately on the DS. I would have loved it. Moving on to the other side mode of this game, we have the Versus mode. By connecting to a host using the DS's download play feature, 3 players who didn't even have to own the game were able to participate in this up to 4-player brawl to collect the most stars. In the waiting room, you got the choice between 4 stages: the Castle Grounds, Sunshine Isles, the Princess's Secret Slide, and Battle Fort. 2 of the 4 stages here, Sunshine Isles and Battle Fort, are completely new stages exclusive to Super Mario 64 DS that can also be accessed in the Adventure mode as well. In this Versus mode, each player plays as a certain color Yoshi, and with the use of character caps scattered all throughout the stages, the Yoshis can transform into Mario, Luigi, or Wario, and use their abilities to help them nab the most stars. I didn't play this mode that much, but when I did, I had a lot of fun with it. It's very simple at its core, but honestly that's what makes it so fun. You could play this with just about anyone, and they'd be able to quickly understand what they had to do and have a good time with it. The last main thing I want to talk about here are the Bowser levels and Bowser fights. The big thing you'll immediately realize when you try to do a Bowser level is that you can only challenge him as Mario. Which, I mean, yeah, makes sense, but I would have loved to take on these levels with the other characters. It would have been so cool if each character had a unique way they fought Bowser. And in the final fight, you got to switch between all 4 characters throughout a multi-stage fight that would end with Mario swinging him by the tail and throwing him into a spike bomb. I can absolutely understand why they didn't do this though, as a change like this might have been too different from the source material, but I still think it's a cool idea. What we do have in the Bowser levels and fights here though, is still a lot of fun. While you probably will have problems in regards to platforming through these levels because of the controls, since these levels are so linear and a lot of the time just a straight line with multiple levels, it's not too bad. The Bowser fights are a lot of fun. Swinging him around with the touchscreen instead of the D-pad felt surprisingly natural. And that final fight with him and Bowser in the sky feels so much more intense and immersive with Bowser's new and more animated model. I mean, just look at the upgrade from this to this. It makes Bowser much more threatening. And collecting that final star after defeating him has never felt better. Super Mario 64 DS is a controversial game among Mario fans. That for one is obvious. I mean, some love it because it upped the star count from 120 to 150 stars, now having each main level include 8 stars instead of 7, introduced completely new stages and bosses, had 4 playable characters all with their own distinct abilities and attributes, and introduced the incredible minigame and versus modes. While others hate it because of its poor and clunky controls that make moving around certain levels an absolute nightmare. Despite the controversy surrounding it though, There is no doubt about it that Super Mario 64 did a lot more than just put the N64 game on the DS. The additions add so much to the experience. Playing through it for the first time in years after being so used to the original, almost felt like playing an entirely new game that at the same time felt so familiar. I feel like a lot of people discount this game as soon as they hear about its wonky controls and never truly give it an honest chance. I genuinely hope by watching this video and hearing me outline the positive aspects of the game, you might try it out for the first time or maybe go back to it after not playing it for years, so you can maybe form your own opinion on if the game is a good remake or not. Personally though, while the controls do hold it back a lot in my eyes, there's so much else to look at besides one flaw. The real thing to look at here is how much Super Mario 64 DS added to the experience as a remake, not the one thing it took away. So despite its flaws that do exist, at the end of the day, Super Mario 64 DS is a great remake, and a DS game I will always love.